In a previous video, about a week ago, I opened and tasted one of these Bentos festive turkey pies. That video is linked here and in the video description. It wasn't the best pie, but we can't really expect very much from these. The retail price, I think, in B&M was £2 for this. So you can't really expect this to be a premium Christmas pie. I said in that video that I would try to make my own festive or Christmas turkey pie, and I'd try to do it to the best of my ability. So that's what we're going to do in this video. So just to answer a couple of common questions, I'm not going to try to make it down to the same price as this. I'm not going to try and compete with this thing on price because, for one thing, I don't have access to the wholesale bulk ingredients that Baxter's do when they make these. But also, we already know what happens when you try and make these pies really cheap. They come out like this. I'm going to try to maximise Christmassiness, the festive flavours, the seasonality of the flavours in the pie. The other question is, am I going to bake it in the empty tin from that other pie? And the answer to that is also no, because for one thing, I think these cans are single use in terms of baking. I know a lot of people do keep them and use them for baking Yorkshire puddings, I think. I'm not very sure, because this is a plastic coated can. After repeated use, that plastic coating will start to break down. I'm not going to try and cook it in this tin for that reason, but also this is a very small tin. I want to make a slightly bigger pie. So just thinking about flavours for this, flavours of Christmas. I think we're still going to go for a turkey and sausage pie. Why sausages with the turkey? I think what Bentos were doing was going for something that's evocative of pigs in blankets, which is a very common accompaniment for Christmas turkey. Pigs in blankets, where I live, means a sausage wrapped in a rasher of bacon. But I want to go deeper into the Christmas flavours. So my pie is going to have a little layer of something with some of the flavours of Christmas cake, Christmas pudding, mince pies. So we're going to have some dried fruit, orange nuts, spices. So I've got some walnuts. I'm just going to get these out of the shells. I'm going to try and do this carefully because I want to reuse these shells for something. I have a plan for that too. So we'll just go in at the stalk end here with my oyster knife. Oh, that didn't work. Fine. We'll hopefully win on the others, but we'll just get these pieces of walnut out. Right, let's see if we can get this walnut apart in two exact halves. Maybe I need a thinner knife. No, we're not going to get these. Yeah, I had an idea for a Christmas craft that requires empty walnut shells that I can glue back together, but I might just have to use whole walnuts. Never mind. Right, I'm just going to very carefully pick over those bits of walnut just to make sure I've only got the nuts in the mix, because Christmas visits to the dentist are to be minimised. I'll chop up these pieces of walnut into smaller bits, and those can go in there. Next, a few dates, which I'll slice up into chunks. I'm not measuring the quantities here, I'm just eyeballing what I think looks about right. Little handful of sultanas, and again I'll chop these just a little bit, just to open some of them up, get the sweetness out from inside them. Dried cranberries. So these will add a bit of acidity, which will balance the sweetness of those other fruits I put in there. And again, I'll just chop them a little bit, just to open some of them up to get the flavours out. This is the day before I'm making the pie, by the way. So this is going to soak overnight. Okay, next we'll have a bit of fresh nutmeg, some cinnamon, just a little sprinkle. We'll have some fresh ginger. No need to peel that, and the peel just stayed on that side of the grater. So that will also go in there. The zest of an orange. I've got a little zester tool. You can use the fine side of the grater for this. You just want the orange part of the rind, which is where all the oils are. In fact, we can probably see the oils spraying when I do that. Did you see oils spraying? Now we're going to have the juice of this orange. I'll use one of my favourite utensils. It's a lemon squeezer, but it works okay for oranges if you quarter them. So it might seem a bit weird that we're making a savoury pie, or pie that is the savoury course of a meal, but it's going to have all these sweet things in it. But the distinction between the idea of courses being, dessert being sweet and the main course being savoury is a relatively modern concept. Certainly, you'd only have to go back a few hundred years and you'd get to the point where the pies and things that were being served contained a mixture of meat and fruits and nuts and sugar and whatever else was available at that time of year. So orange juice is going to go in there. Stir that all together. Let's have a little sniff. Oh, that smells like Christmas already. It really does. That will be covered up. That can go in the fridge overnight for tomorrow we pie. I'm going to use the larger of my two pie tins for this, and I'm going to make a top crust of rough puff pastry, which will puff up hopefully, and a bottom crust of short crust, but I'm going to make these both in the same mix. I'll show how I do that. So I've got 500 grams of strong flour here, a mixture of strong wholemeal and strong white. By strong I mean bread flour. It has a little bit more gluten in it, it will hold together better as a pie crust. The fat we'll be using for this pastry is a mixture of unsalted butter and lard. Lard helps to make a really crisp pastry. So for 500 grams of flour, we want 333 grams of fat. It's like 3 parts flour to 2 parts fat. And so that my fat doesn't stick to the dish here, I'll just put a bit of flour in there and then zero the scales. So I want about 150 grams each-ish of the two fats. So that is quite a lot of fat. And this fat's going to go in to the flour in like centimetre chunks. So if we're making short crust pastry here, I'd be then looking to blend this flour and fat together. We're not making short crust pastry first, we're going to make rough puff. So I want this fat to be in big chunks. I don't want all the lumps of fat to stick together, so every now and again I'll just give them a little toss like that. The fat is cold, straight from the fridge, and I'm working in a cold room, which is what we really need to do, because I don't want this fat to melt into the pastry. I want it to stay in pieces. A little bit of salt in the pastry. I could have just used salted butter, but I happen to have unsalted. Now, ice cold water, and really just a little splash like that. And then we're only just going to add enough water to bring this together into a shaggy dough, I think is what some people call it, but don't want to add too much water or else it'll go all soft and gluey. I think I've added less than 100 ml of water there. I can't really tell you the exact amount you'll need because it does depend a fair bit on the absorbency of your flour. Wholemeal flour will tend to absorb a little bit more water than plain white. So now flour the surface, and all of this proto pastry is going to come out of here onto there. Now, unlike with making scones where you don't knead because you want it to be crumbly, this one we are not going to knead it too much, but for a different reason. The reason for not kneading it here is that I don't want to just destroy those big chunks of fat, because those provide the lamination in the pastry. So what I'm going to do now is start to roll this out, and it will be awfully rough to start with, but don't worry about that. Roll it approximately flat, fold it approximately in 3, and roll again. I'll gather up all these loose bits and put them inside. Now again, we're just going to fold, turn that over now, so all of the messy join is underneath, and then roll again. But what's happening now is every time we fold over, we're creating layers, and every time we roll out, we're smearing these lumps of fat out into streaks, which will cause the pastry to delaminate when it bakes. Again, fold and fold. And I'm just going to keep doing this until we've got what appears to be a more homogeneous dough. If I find the gluten is starting to resist me, I'll just let it rest for a little bit. Just let it sit for a minute, and it will relax and become more workable. So every time now, I'm just giving it a quarter turn like that, and then rolling in the opposite direction. These streaks of fat are going to get rolled that way, then spread out that way. and they become thin layers of fat in between thin layers of dough. I don't know how many folds that was, but we've got there. So we can just faintly see little streaks of butter and lard in there. So that's rough puff pastry. But I said I was going to make two different sorts of pastry, didn't I? What I'm going to do now is just roll this out a little bit. And because this process of folding and rolling has curled the edges over, the best bit of the pastry is going to be right in the middle there. So I'm going to divide this roughly into a bit more than half and a bit less than half. So a bit less than half rough puff pastry, and you can probably maybe just make out the layers. That's going to be the lid of the pie. A bit more than half, that's going to be the base of the pie. But at the moment that's just weird scraps of pastry. The rough puff is going to go in the fridge to rest now. This lot, I need to now work it so that that fat gets more evenly distributed into the pastry. And the easiest way to do that is a food processor. Not sure whether this is too much for one batch, but let's see how we get on. Yeah, I think that might be too much for one batch. So yeah, all that's happened is it's broken up all of that fat and homogenized it with the flour. So similarly, my short dough is also going to go in the fridge to rest for a bit. I'm going to line this pie dish with pastry now. But first, I'm just greasing the inside with lard. I'm using lard because that will help the outside of this bottom layer of pastry to crisp up, but also because it's a solid fat, which means we can be reasonably certain that it will entirely coat this pan and it won't leave any spots dry where the pastry will stick. Just for a little layer of flavour, I've got some black pepper, ground black pepper. I was going to use the pepper mill, but it grinds too coarsely for this. This is the short crust pastry, which has been resting in the fridge. Now, as to whether a pie technically needs a top and bottom crust to be called a pie, a lot of people argue strenuously about this, and I hope and believe that most of them are messing around. So I'm going to take off some of that pastry because I can't roll it thin enough. So I hope and believe that most of those people are messing around. But I think some people take it really seriously, and where does that get fun? They don't seem to be enjoying themselves. So the question I have to ask is it a healthy mental habit to cultivate, to be continually strictly defining things in order to exclude things from that definition? For me, something's a pie. If people call it a pie, that is how words work. Pumpkin pie only has a bottom crust. Shepherd's pie and fish pie don't have any pastry at all. Anyway, let's have a look. That looks like it'll be big enough. Roll it up and then roll it back over. And then to get this to sit down into the dish, just lift up the edges. I'm not going to push it down or stretch it down. I'm going to lift it up and coax it over the edge. Okay, so that's my bottom crust. Now, if this was a pie with no lid, we would probably blind bake that to crisp up this crust. But it's not normal to blind bake a full crust pie, because that will just make it problematic to join the top crust on, to fuse it onto the pastry. So this will not be blind baked. And as a result, there'll be a limit to the crispiness of the bottom crust. I'm not going to trim off all of this pastry because I want to leave myself a little bit to work with. So I'll cut it with scissors around here like this. And that's my lined pastry case. So that's just going to go back in the fridge for another half hour. But now I need to go back in time to show you what we're going to put in here. So the making of my turkey pie starts a couple of days beforehand. I've got this turkey leg. It's a drumstick and a thigh. I bought this because, for one thing, it's really very reasonably priced. But the other is that it's all dark meat, which is the bit I like of the turkey. So anyway, we're going to roast this for a Sunday dinner, and then the pie is going to be made from leftovers. So to begin, I've got a leek. I'll just go and give that a rinse just in case there's any dirt in the middle there. And then this is just going to be roughly chopped up. There's no There's no finesse required here. This is just going to provide a bed for the turkey piece to sit on in the roasting pan. 3 sticks of celery, let's trim those. And again, that's just going to go in the pan. A couple of carrots, not going to bother peeling them, but we'll just trim the ends off. And that's going to go on there as well. A little bit of oil just to stop those vegetables burning as they warm up. And then this turkey leg, just going to go on there whole like that. And then into an oven and roast. That's probably going to take a couple of hours roasting at 180 Celsius. The good thing with it being dark meat is it's really difficult to overcook. Just give that a little bit of salt on the skin. And then I've got some Cumberland sausages. And so we're going to make pigs in blankets. So I'm cooking a roast dinner for just the 2 of us. But I'm cooking enough food for probably 5 or 6. And I'm cooking with a view to deliberately creating leftovers, because actually it's quite an efficient way to cook anyway. You know, the oven's got to go on and it won't consume twice as much energy to cook twice as much food in the oven. It's almost like a bit of batch cooking, really. So my roast potatoes and things are going to go in here as well. And this dinner's going to be kind of my Christmas dinner. We're not going to have turkey and all the trimmings on Christmas Day, so I'm having it now. I'm not going to show you the rest of the prep because it's not really relevant to the pie that is the main topic of this episode. Okay, that turkey's at 74 Celsius in the thickest part without touching the bone, so that's done. The meat's going to come off now and rest. Which means my roast vegetables and pigs in blankets can get promoted to the top shelf. I put them in a bit later than the turkey, so those still need about maybe 20 minutes cooking. Turkey's just going to get a loose covering of foil. Just keep the heat in, let that rest. This roasting pan with all the vegetables in it and the dripping juices from the turkey, that's going to go into this strainer. So that's a leek, 3 sticks of celery and a couple of carrots in there, and they're all soft now. There is a reason for straining that, and that's that the fat is going to float on top of that liquid at the bottom there. It's handheld blender time. Alright, so all of those vegetables are going to be part of the gravy. It's going to be gravy that is somewhat like soup. Some of the liquid from parboiling the potatoes and parsnips, and blend. That, basically vegetable soup. Such a lot of flavour in that, because it's not just the vegetables. This was cooked in the fats and the juices of the meat, so it's acquired some of those flavours. Then, basting pipette, I'm going to go in underneath the fat layer on here and just get the meat juices. You can get gravy separator jugs. I've never actually owned one. This way works really well. This gravy, I mean, it looks a little bit pale at the moment, but we can put a little bit of gravy browning in there. So that's pretty much the gravy made. And then this fat, which is a mixture of turkey fat and the oil that I added to the vegetables, we're going to save that. Roast potatoes, parsnips and pigs in blankets are looking good now. I've turned the heat down a little bit just to hold them. There'll be some fat to come off of this as well, and that will not go to waste either. I'll put that in the same pot. Okay, here's the plan. So turkey has rested a bit now. The thigh part here is what we're going to carve for dinner. The drumstick is what I'm going to save for making the pie. Reason being, this is all full of weird little sinews that harden when they're cooked, and so they're like little weird sticks of bone. That's not easy to carve, but it's easy to pick apart. Anyway, let's just have a look at this turkey thigh. Looks good. This, you can see juices flowing when I carve this. Now this might look a little bit pink. It is absolutely cooked to the book because I temperature probed it. Okay, so lovely crispy roast potatoes. The roast potatoes, when I shook them in the pan after boiling them, I shook them in oil and some of my Spanish thyme and a bit of lemon juice. And then roast parsnips, pigs in blankets, steamed Savoy cabbage, steamed carrot batons, and then the roast turkey. Penultimately, some of this thick vegetable gravy. And then finally, quince jelly that I made earlier in the year. I think this will be a superb foil for the turkey. Quince jelly is really good to go with roast meats. That's a kind of slightly better than average Sunday roast, but that's not the main event of this video. The leftovers, and what we do with the leftovers is what comes next. So this is now cooled down. I'm just going to go through and pick off the meat off these bones. Anything that's not meat, I'm going to put to one side. We're going to use to make stock, except maybe the odd little bit of crispy skin. So yeah, this is the thing that puts a lot of people off turkey drumsticks, but if you're going to pull it apart like this, it's really not a problem. It's only if you were to try and carve that at the table. There are ways to remove these before you cook it. I've never attempted it. So this dark turkey meat, it may not look quite as pretty. I mean, aesthetics are a funny thing anyway. It may not look quite as appealing to some people as a nice carved slice of breast meat, but it has loads more flavour, and it is also much more moist. So yeah, phenomenal amount of meat left over. We got all of those bits which are going to be fantastic for making stock. There is one slight problem. That bone doesn't fit in that box. So, serrated kitchen knife. And I'm just going to make a little notch there. Turn it over so that's on the underside. Rolling pin. Done. In fact, I might just do the same with the other bone. Wow, couldn't have done that if I tried. These pigs in blankets can go in there with the turkey. These leftover roast potatoes and parsnips. The sticky bits on this pan are not going to go to waste. And there's a little bit of carrot as well, and a tiny bit of cabbage. And there's loads of gravy. So all these leftovers, I mean, what I could do is just chop up some turkey and some potatoes and vegetables and the sausages and put it in a dish, pour some gravy over it, sheet of puff pastry on the top, bake it, and you've got a pie. In this pan, just turn the heat up underneath it, and I've got a little bit of liquid left over. That's the water that was drained out of the parboiled vegetables. It's got a few little bits of gravy stuff in it as well. I'm going to heat it up and use that liquid to loosen off all of this fond. So what you're watching here is pretty much my standard post-Sunday dinner drill, because this process of making leftovers on purpose and then packing them down is a really, really good way to provision a few easy meals in the week. Soups, stews, curries, easy pies. If all of the ingredients are already cooked, all you have to do is just assemble it and bang it in the oven or in a saucepan, and it's a really quick dinner. Now that's had a chance to cool down, I'm just going to put it in the stock box, because that's going to go into the pressure cooker when I make stock, along with all the bones and some more liquid. Time to make the stock, and these bones and liquid that I got from the pan, I put in the freezer overnight, just because there wasn't enough room in the fridge. The pressure cooker doesn't mind things going in there frozen. That, plus enough water that's going to properly cover all those bones when they've thawed, which is about that much. A couple of fresh bay leaves, stock, and go. Okay, the stock is done. I think you've seen me do this several times before, but anyway, I'm just going to strain that through here. And then tomorrow that will be used to make the gravy to fill the pie. The next day, pie day, a change has taken place. One of the changes is that this stock has become an amazing wobbly jelly. The other is all of the fat. That's mostly the fat from the turkey, but it's also fat from the sausages and from the bacon. Actually, I wasn't thinking hard enough there, so I'm just going to go melt that in the jug in the microwave. This fat has now separated. There was a bit of stock with it, which I don't want with the fat. So again, using my basting pipette, I'm just going to draw off the stock layer from underneath. That can go back in the stock pot, leaving us with pretty much pure turkey and bacon and pork sausage fat. So that turkey fat, and into there some plain flour. I'm just going to judge this by eye. but enough flour to make a paste. That's too thin. So we're making here a roux, which is a paste of flour and fat, which is going to be then cooked. And then we're going to add stock to that to make the gravy. So the gravy is essentially going to be a velouté. Okay, I can smell that is now cooked. People say it resembles hazelnuts, the smell. I don't know. It has got a kind of nuttiness to it. And then the stock, the turkey stock. And we won't get lumps here as long as I keep whisking and as long as I'm adding the stock cold. But I've got to make sure I go right down into the corners of the pan down there. You can see that's thickening up, so we'll get another ladle of stock in there. Just whisk vigorously to make sure we don't get lumps forming. And I don't know how much stock I need because I didn't measure the fat, but we will get to a point where I can sense that it's not going to thicken anymore. And the way to do that is you cook it until it almost over thickens a little bit, and then dial it back with a bit of stock, and keep doing that until you get to the point where you realise it's not going to thicken anymore. So now we can add some seasonings, which obviously it's going to need a little bit of salt. I'm going to add some of my Spanish wild thyme. So that has thickened again, but not all that much. Also, another flavour of Christmas, a little dash of brandy. That's going to make quite a thick gravy, but that's not a bad thing for inside a pie. It does need a bit more salt. Okay, I think that can come off the heat now. So that's my gravy. It's probably a little bit still under seasoned, and it also looks a little bit pale. This is not one of the tastes of Christmas for me, but it's a thing I sometimes do with gravy. A little bit of dark soy, just to enrich the flavour, and also give it a bit more of a gravy colour. I love making gravy because you get to taste it constantly. That's good. So that's the gravy, well, mostly. Going to let that cool now. Afterthought. So Christmas is a time for looking back on the year. And of course we're using some of this wild thyme that I brought back from Spain this year. So that's a memory for me. Another one though is my porcini powder, because we had a particularly successful foraging year this year for ceps or penny buns. This is my mushroom powder. I think this would be a fantastic addition to this gravy. So about half a teaspoonful of that in there. It is quite potent. The gravy's cooled down now, and it's actually quite thick. And I know I wasn't very kind about the Fray Bentos gravy being really thick and gloopy, but this is cold. When it warms up, it will thin down. I'm putting in here some creme fraiche because it's a kind of buttery, creamy flavour, and together with the brandy in the gravy, I'm hoping will give us a kind of brandy butter vibe, which is a very Christmassy thing. So I'm sure I could have put that in when that was hot, because creme fraiche doesn't generally split. But there it is when it's cold. Let's have a taste of that now. Cold gravy. Oh yeah, that is good. That actually enhances some of the other flavours in there, the herbs especially. Here's my leftover turkey and pigs in blankets. Pieces like that can go straight in. Anything bigger than that is going to get cut. And I'm just watching out for bits of gristle here. And someone else is watching out for bits of gristle. I just heard a little whimper. Did you hear it? So bits of turkey in there. Likewise, pigs in blankets. I'll cut them into chunks. Here's the source of the small whimpering sound. Okay, you may go. So Eva has backed off, but not very far, because there's still meat around. Because this gravy is so thick, I think I'll put a bit in there now, so that I can just spread it around. Something I forgot is how we're going to keep the middle of the crust up. So I'm going to put a pie bird in there. I've got two pie birds. I've got that one, which is a crow. That one looks a bit more festive, doesn't it? That needs to go in the middle of the pie to support the top crust. I should have done this before I put any of the other ingredients in, but it'll be fine. So we'll just keep going with these chunks of turkey. This pie will serve, well, 6 standard portions, 4 generous portions, 2 gluttonous portions, depending on how you're feeling on the day. Okay, and then we'll have the other pigs in blankets. So that's my meaty fillings in the pie. We just maybe need one more thing in there. Back at the end of October, we had a bumper harvest of sweet chestnuts that we foraged. Many of those we roasted and used as they were, but even more, we parboiled them, peeled them, and froze them. I think a few chestnuts will not go amiss in our festive pie. I boiled them just to thaw them. Yeah, I don't think we're going to succeed in peeling those chestnuts, so I'm just going to chop them and press them onto the top of the pie here and just share them around. So the next element is this mincemeat. This is what that mincemeat looks like the following day. All of that orange juice is soaked into the dried fruit. Flavours of the spices and the orange zest have all combined and infused. So now this is going to go across the top here, just in a thin layer. There we go. Lovely fruity, spiced, zesty mincemeat layer. And then there is just one more thing for our festive pie. We just go back to this morning for that. One of the traditional accompaniments for a roast turkey Christmas dinner is stuffing, often sage and onion stuffing, and that's just a mixture of breadcrumbs and herbs and onions. But instead of onions, what about homegrown leeks? Now, fun thing, leeks can be grown as perennials. Traditionally, when people grow leeks in a garden, they pull them up and use the whole thing and discard the little basal plate with the roots. But the plant wants to be a perennial, so we can help it with that. All I need to do is just cut the leek a little bit below the soil surface and take that much of the leek, leaving the basal plate and roots in the soil. Eventually it will form a clump and we'll just have perennial leeks growing here in the vegetable plot. Also got some sage here in the garden, so now it's not on top form at this time of year, but it'll work. So here's my leek, superficially washed just to get the surface dirt off of it, but we will need to wash that inside as well. First I will just discard the less pretty looking bits of the leaf tips. The rest of that can all be used, except the dirt. Well, this time I'm going to slip all the way down and then just take that to the tap like that as a bunch, and I can rinse all of those bits out. So I want to cook this a little bit just to moisten it before we put it into the stuffing, because otherwise I think it might just dry out into little leafy shreds. And here I'm going to use some of the fat that I reserved from that roasting pan midway in the roasting process yesterday. So just a bit of that in there. In go my pieces of leek. Also my sage leaves. I'm just going to cook them gently to get the flavours to start coming out. Back over here at the food processor. This is some bread I made a couple of days ago for a video you haven't seen yet. Actually, it's going to be on wild leeks. I made some soup and I made some bread to go with it. So I think we want probably less than half of what's left of that loaf of now slightly stale bread. My leeks and sage. At the other end of the pie there is going to be some black pepper underneath the bottom crust. So in the top of the pie we'll have some more black pepper. A little bit of salt. Okay, that's my breadcrumb mix. It's not quite stuffing yet though. And since the liquid of the day is turkey stock, that's what I shall use. Just a little bit of that in there. Yep, that's about right. Now, in case you're thinking that this pie so far has expended a great deal of effort to make, you're quite right. It is labour, and this is a lot of work. This is a labour of love, I think, because I want to make a really Christmassy pie. So that's the stuffing. That can just go in the fridge for the moment. That's the leek and sage stuffing I made this morning. I don't know how well these layers are going to stay separate in the cooking. Time will tell, I suppose. That's a very full pie. I'm going to press that down so that when the top crust goes on, it doesn't go all lumpy. We could just bake it like that, probably without the pie bird, although he's fun. That stuffing would crisp up as a top crust on its own. The pie is momentarily set aside. My rough puff pastry that's been resting all this time. I'm just going to gently roll that out in both directions. think that's about right. It's only maybe 3-4 millimeters thick. Just moisten around the edge of the bottom crust with some water to help it stick. Something like that. Just allow that little bird to peep through. And again, scissors are probably the easiest way to do this. You can do it with a knife on the edge of the rim, but I don't want to trim right to the edge of the dish. I want to leave a little bit of pastry on there to work with. And the other way. And then we need to put a crimp on this. So it is just thumbs and forefingers together all the way round to make a decorative crimp, but also this is bonding this top layer onto the bottom layer. Okay, now we can carefully pick up the pie in one hand, and with the other hand, and holding the knife vertical like that, just go around the edge. Let's see if you can see what I'm doing. And just trim off any excess pastry. Being very careful not to drop the pie on the floor. Decorations are going to be done in short crust, so we've got the short crust pastry back. And I roll these thin. I've got more of this pastry as well, so we'll have to think of a thing to do with some excess pastry. I've already got an idea. A holly leaf cutter. I cut out a load of holly leaves. Back in a moment when that's done. So these decorations are going to go onto the pie. Let's just see if we can figure out how they're going to go. I wonder if we should give this little guy in the middle a collar of holly leaves. Not sure. Let's just offer these up for the moment. So just wet those to make them stick. So my holly leaf decorations, that's that. The oven is preheating to bake my very Christmas pie. But first, we're going to give it an egg wash. All over the top, and this is going to give us a lovely glossy crust, and it will protect this pastry from burning as well. This will probably have to be baked for an hour because it's a big old pie, and whilst I think the pastry actually needs cooking, all of that mass inside the pie has to be heated up to piping hot. So that's it egg washed, and this little pie bird will provide some steam vent because he's got a little open mouth, but I've just cut a couple of extra little steam vents just there. I don't want the pastry to inflate and burst. We'll start that on 45 minutes and see how we go. The pie is substantial, but we'll need something to go with it. So I think we can have some crinkle cut carrots, some Brussels sprouts. It's not going to be Christmas without them, is it? Probably need some kind of potato, even though there is a lot of pastry. As luck would have it, we have the leftovers from the roast dinner. Potatoes, parsnips, but a little bit of carrot and some cabbage in there. That is the makings of Bubble and Squeak. In keeping with the seasonal theme, I'm going to give us a little bit of a Boxing Day vibe. We'll just have a little shake of curry powder in there. Just a little hint of the day after Christmas, where all the leftover turkey, leftover veg gets just slapped together into a curry sauce. It's an institution. I've got this egg left over from the egg wash. I'll just put a bit of that in there to help that bind. Oven-proof tray, some of that fat that was left over from the roast on Sunday. And those will go in the oven underneath the pie, maybe halfway through cooking. I feel like we might need a bit of additional gravy to pour over things. So this is that leftover gravy from the roast dinner. And I might loosen that with a bit of stock as well. The rest of this turkey stock I will probably decant into freezable containers. That last bit of leftover egg, I know a certain little good girl that can have that with her dinner. Good girl. Right, there is the baked pie. The gravy was boiling out the top of these vents here, so I stopped it and I've probed it and it's up to about 70 inside. That'll stand while I do the vegetables and other bits and pieces. Right, time has come to serve this. It's almost a shame to cut into it, but we must. It feels like the pastry has baked crisp on the bottom, but whether we'll get it out in one piece is another matter. The first slice is going to be a disaster, so I will serve that for myself. It kind of worked. Let us see if the next slice will behave itself a bit better. Oh, I think it could be enough with this one. There it is. And still a little bit messy on the exit, but that is just the nature of pies, I think. That is to be served with some lovely little sprouts, crinkly carrots, Boxing Day potatoes, I think we'll call that, and then just a little bit of pour over gravy. I'm going to go and serve Jenny's before it gets cold, and then we'll come back and give that a taste. I'm going to enjoy this with a bottle of Theakston's Old Peculiar at cellar temperature. And while we're waiting for that to just calm down a bit, the layers have kind of survived. Let's have a taste. So this is the turkey and pigs in blankets layer, and that gravy with a little bit of brandy and creamy finish. It does have a little bit of a brandy butter vibe, which is fantastic. There's the stuffing, and underneath that will be the mincemeat. So let's try that bit. It's hot, and despite being sweet and fruity, that really does work well with the savoury dish. We should do this more with pies. This used to be a thing all the time. Medieval pies, very often, full of fruit and meat and nuts and sugar and spices. We should do more of this. There's a bit of the stuffing. It's good. Let me try a little bit of this Boxing Day potatoes. I like that too. It's not a strong curry flavour, but it's nice. Pastry. Let's have a look at the underside of the pastry. So the top layer, tiny little bit doughy on the underside, but you can't avoid that. This is my rough puff top. And it does have layers. Rather than stand here wittering with my dinner going cold, I'm just going to go and eat that now, and I'll hand you over to Studio Shrimp for the wrap-up. Studio Shrimp here. That went reasonably well, I thought. I didn't get a good shot of the bottom crust until later, so here's what that looked like. Definitely a nice bit of browning on the underside of the pastry. The inside was more dumpling-like, but let's not say that as if it's a bad thing. A thin metal pie dish is best for a full crust pie like this, where there's no blind baking of the bottom crust. I think if I'd used a stoneware pie dish, the result might not have been this crisp. I think the only part of this pie that maybe didn't go as well as I might have hoped it would was the top decoration. The holly leaves were maybe just a bit small and indistinct, but I think it still looked like a good pie. Maybe just not quite as obviously a Christmas pie at first glance. In terms of individual flavours and combinations, I'm delighted with how well they all worked. The layers of meat and gravy, sweet mincemeat and then stuffing stayed distinct enough to taste on their own if desired, but they also tasted good in combination. Pre-cooking the leeks kept them delicious and moist, and the aromatics of orange and ginger, cinnamon and nutmeg were good with the fruit and meat. This pie did contain a lot of the flavours of Christmas. In fact, I struggled to think of what else we could add that might make it more festive, more Christmassy. Chocolate crossed my mind, and it's not unheard of to cook meat with chocolate, but I don't think adding it here would have really worked all that well. Maybe some sort of Christmas tree pine needle aroma could have been worked in somehow, but I'm not sure exactly how. We both enjoyed this pie. I cut another 2 generous portions and froze them, leaving about a quarter of the pie to be eaten hot or cold the next day. So should you try making this pie? Almost certainly not. This was actually an absurd level of effort for just one pie, albeit a good one. But this wasn't supposed to be a recipe video. This is more of a curious experiment. I hope that maybe there are some ideas in here, though, that can be picked out and used on their own. The obvious takeaways to my eye are the idea of making leftovers on purpose, maybe the flavour combinations perhaps, and the underappreciated turkey leg. It really is the best part of the bird, I think. So how does this compare to the Fray Bentos festive pie? Well, it just doesn't. This wasn't even supposed to be a comparison video. This is a different thing that I was inspired to try making, in part by my slight disappointment from the Fray Bentos pie. That was what it was, and this is what this is. In case you're wondering, the ingredient cost for everything you saw in this video, excluding the beer, is somewhere around £12, which I think is tremendous value really, considering that we got 4 full plated meals out of it, plus at least another 3 slices of pie, a couple of pints of really nice turkey stock, and there's still some cold meat and some gravy left. There's also a fair bit of pastry left over, with which I will make some jam tarts or mince pies. But this video is already quite long, so if you want to see that bit, it will be in the next episode of Random Stuff, sometime in December. It took me most of the day to make this pie, although a good portion of that was messing around with cameras, and some of it I spent editing this video, so as I say, I can't prescribe this as anything like a practical recipe. It did make me start to feel the spirit of the season a bit, though, both making and certainly eating this pie. I think it would be possible to make something approximately similar with a lot less effort by using ready-made pastry, leftover meat and gravy, maybe some Christmas pudding or fruitcake in place of the homemade mincemeat, and just regular sage and onion stuffing mixed to go under the top crust. I reckon you could get to 80% of the feeling for 20% of the effort that way. The beer was great too, by the way. This is not by any means my first bottle of Old Peculiar, but it's a really great English ale. Dark and malty and incredibly well balanced. Not sponsored, I'm just a fan. So I hope this video has been interesting and maybe made you feel a little bit of anticipation for Christmas. It certainly has me. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.